You seriously think you can just buy a farm outside the HOA and get away with it? Karen's voice cut through the warm morning air like a knife. Her perfectly styled hair seemed to shimmer with indignation, and her designer heels clicked sharply on the gravel as she approached me. I stared at her, half amused, half excited, feeling the adrenaline rush through me. I had waited years for this moment. My very own farm, my own piece of freedom, and no HOA queen was going to make me second-guess it. "Watch me," I said calmly, letting my words land like a quiet explosion. Her eyes narrowed, disbelief etched across her face. "This is private property. I followed every rule, every law, and I'm not leaving." Karen gasped, placing a perfectly manicured hand over her heart like I had insulted her personally. "You don't understand. The HOA, my rules. You can't just escape them and expect no consequences. People like you, you're reckless, selfish." I couldn't help but smirk. People like her always believed they had the final word, that the world would bend to their whims. "Karen," I said, leaning on the fence post, "I didn't buy this land to follow someone else's rules. I bought it to live, to breathe, to be free. And if that scares you, well, I can't help that." The tension was thick, almost visible, and I swear I could hear the neighbors peeking through their windows, holding their breath. Karen opened her mouth, as if to fire back, but I interrupted. "Do you ever get tired of controlling everything? Or is it your full-time hobby?" Her jaw tightened, and for a brief moment, I thought she might actually explode. But then, with a sly, venomous smile, she said, "You'll regret this. I'll make sure of it." And with that, she stormed off, her SUV kicking up dust in a dramatic swirl. I watched her go, a strange mix of exhilaration and apprehension settling in my chest. Finally, I exhaled. This was my land, my dream, my life. And no one was taking it from me, not Karen, not the HOA, no one. As I walked across the property, feeling the warm earth under my boots, I imagined all the things I would do. Rows of vibrant vegetables, a barn filled with curious goats, chickens clucking happily near the farmhouse. It was a little slice of heaven, and I had worked too hard to let anyone ruin it. But something inside me knew this was just the beginning. Karen didn't quit when she lost, and she would be back. Later that afternoon, I found a stack of letters neatly placed at my front gate. They were from the HOA, full of legal jargon and veiled threats. Every line was designed to make me doubt myself, to make me question whether I had the right to this freedom. But I knew I had. I had done everything legally, everything properly. And suddenly, it clicked. This wasn't about rules. It was about power. Karen's power in her little kingdom versus my power in this new world I had carved out. That night, I walked the perimeter of the farm, the sun sinking behind distant hills and painting the sky in deep oranges and purples. Fireflies blinked to life, like tiny sparks of hope dancing across the fields. I knelt to inspect the soil, planting the first basil and rosemary seeds, imagining their green shoots poking through the dirt in a few weeks. These small acts felt defiant, almost revolutionary. Every seed was a statement. I belonged here. I was here to stay. And then I thought about Karen again. Her fury, her need to dominate, her obsession with controlling what wasn't hers. How far would she go to drive me out? How much more ridiculous, how much more absurd could her actions get? I shook my head, smiling at the thought. Let her try. But here's the twist, and here's where I want you to pause and think. Have you ever faced someone who tried to control your life just because you dared to be happy? I wanted to comment below with your story, because I know I'm not alone in this. And while you're at it, like this video and subscribe to the channel, because what comes next, you will not believe it. Karen's about to escalate, and it's going to get wild. The very next morning, as the mist lifted over the farm, I noticed tire tracks near the barn. They weren't mine. Someone had driven across my freshly planted soil, leaving a jagged, angry pattern behind. My stomach twisted, but my resolve hardened. Karen had already begun. This was no longer a neighborly disagreement. It was war. I could feel the stakes climbing with every letter, Every visit, every whispered threat from her loyal followers in the neighborhood. I had to stay one step ahead, to protect not just my land, but the dream I had nurtured for years. It was terrifying, exhilarating, and addictive all at once. Each moment became a test of courage, patience, and ingenuity. That week, as I fenced the garden and repaired the tire marks, a neighbor approached me, Mr. Collins, a kind older man who had lived here for decades. "Most people crumble when Karen sets her sights on them," he said quietly, eyeing the farmhouse with a mix of admiration and worry. "But I think you might be different. I think you might last." I smiled, feeling a spark of hope. "I didn't come here to fold," I said. "I came here to live." Little did I know, Karen was already plotting her next move, one that would test every ounce of patience I had, challenge every belief I held, and turn my dream into a battlefield. She wasn't just going to argue or complain. She was going to escalate in ways I couldn't even imagine. And when it happened, it would change everything. The battle for my farm had begun, and for the first time, I understood. This wasn't just about property. It was about standing up for yourself, about daring to take what's yours in a world that tries to tell you otherwise. And I was ready. By the time the sun rose the next morning, my farm already bore the first scars of Karen's wrath. Tire tracks had gouged through the freshly tilled soil, flattened the basil sprouts I had carefully planted, and left a visible statement of her intrusion. I stood at the edge of the garden, fists clenched, watching the chaos she had created. But instead of anger, a strange thrill ran through me. Karen was serious. She wasn't going to give up, and neither would I. The following week became a game of cat and mouse. Every morning, I would wake to some new act of sabotage. One day, the mailbox had been overturned and the letters inside soaked in muddy water. Another day, I found strange signs posted along the property line. HOA rules apply here, in bold, menacing letters, like a warning from some twisted authority. My neighbors whispered that Karen had even tried to hire someone to inspect the land, to intimidate me into selling. But the absurdity of it all only strengthened my resolve. One afternoon, while fixing a broken fence post near the barn, I noticed a cluster of her followers lurking at the edge of my property. They waved, unnervingly polite, but there was malice in their eyes. I waved back calmly, pretending not to notice, knowing Karen was watching through the neighborhood grapevine. And then, without warning, one of them drove a large tractor onto the adjacent field, scaring off the chickens I had just purchased. I ran toward them, heart pounding, waving my arms and yelling for them to stop. But by the time I reached the fence, they had vanished, leaving behind only chaos and a flurry of feathers. It wasn't just small annoyances anymore. Karen was escalating. And as the days went by, the stakes grew higher. She called the local news with stories of supposed violations, painted me as a reckless outsider, and even attempted to convince my neighbors that I had broken laws I hadn't even heard of. Flyers appeared on my porch, claiming that my illegal farm threatened property values. I laughed bitterly at the absurdity. The more she tried to intimidate me, the more determined I became. One evening, I was decorating the barn with fairy lights, imagining the cozy dinners and celebrations I would host there, when I saw movement in the distance. Karen had parked her SUV at the far end of the property again, glaring at me with that impossible combination of fury and smug satisfaction. But this time, she wasn't alone. Her army had gathered behind her, neighbors who feared her wrath, eager to watch me falter. I took a deep breath and smiled to myself. Let them come. Let them see the spirit they couldn't break. The next act was truly cinematic. I woke to find that someone had let the goats out of the barn overnight. They had trampled the young vegetable patches, knocked over planters, and made a mess that looked almost deliberate, almost theatrical. I stood among the chaos, dust on my hands, and for a moment, I considered calling it quits. But then I remembered the thrill of the first day, the smell of fresh earth, the dream I had been chasing for so long. Karen may have tried to shake me, but she couldn't destroy the vision I held in my heart. I called in reinforcements, friends and family who shared my love for this land and my refusal to back down. Together, we repaired the fences, replanted the damaged crops, and fortified the barn. Every plank we nailed, every seed we planted felt like a statement. Karen could try, but she wouldn't win. And it wasn't just about the farm anymore. It was about resilience, about proving that no one could dictate happiness by fear or manipulation. But Karen's obsession only grew. One day, I discovered that she had hired a private investigator to follow me, supposedly to ensure my farm was compliant. I could feel her eyes on me, watching every movement, making even mundane tasks feel like a challenge. And then came the absurdity that would become legendary in the neighborhood. She attempted to set up an HOA meeting right outside my property, trying to enforce rules that didn't apply. Neighbors gathered, whispers spreading like wildfire, and I watched with quiet amusement as Karen fumed, red-faced, unable to bend reality to her will. Despite all her efforts, something remarkable happened. People started coming to the farm on their own, intrigued by the drama and charmed by the beauty of the land. Children ran through the fields, laughing as the chickens scuttled behind them. Friends arrived with baskets of fresh vegetables, and soon, what began as a war against me became a celebration of life outside the restrictive walls of the HOA. Karen's attempts to intimidate were backfiring spectacularly. Yet, the tension never fully lifted. Every rustle in the trees, every late-night engine sound made me tense. I knew Karen wasn't done. Her obsession with control was like a storm waiting to strike, unpredictable and relentless. And while the farm was thriving, every act of growth and joy was tinged with the awareness that she could escalate at any moment. The turning point came during a weekend festival I decided to host, welcoming neighbors and friends to enjoy the farm. Lanterns swayed in the gentle breeze, tables were laden with fresh produce and baked goods, and laughter filled the air. Karen appeared, of course, like an uninvited storm cloud, her arms crossed and lips pursed. But something unexpected happened. People ignored her. They were laughing, celebrating, and living freely, right in front of her. Her power had limits, and for the first time, it was visible. I watched her storm off that evening, the setting sun casting long shadows over the fields. There was a strange satisfaction in seeing someone so used to control confronted by the unstoppable force of life and freedom. The farm had become more than just a property. It was a symbol that dreams, determination, and community could overcome even the most relentless opposition. And yet, in the quiet moments after the festival, as the stars blinked awake and the fireflies danced among the crops, I knew the battle wasn't over. Karen's wrath would return, perhaps bigger, more absurd, more dramatic than before. And when it did, I had to be ready, not just for her, but for the challenge of protecting the dream I had fought so hard to create. The war for my farm had escalated from petty threats to cinematic sabotage, and every day brought a new test of patience, courage, and ingenuity. But one thing was certain. Karen could try to crush me, control me, or scare me, but she could never destroy the spirit that had brought this farm to life. It started innocently enough, or at least, as innocently as Karen could ever manage. I was trimming the rose bushes along the edge of my property, humming to myself, when I noticed her again, parked across the road in her obnoxiously white SUV. This time, she had a tripod set up, a camera aimed at my land like she was filming some reality show about illegal farmers. I blinked. Was this real life? Karen, the HOA queen, had somehow turned into a full-blown paparazzo, determined to document my every move as if my life were entertainment for her own amusement. She didn't stop there. The next day, I found flyers stapled to trees, mailed to neighbors, even taped to the barn. Beware. Unauthorized farm operations. Violates HOA spirit and property morals. The wording was ridiculous, the font dramatic, almost comic, but the intent was clear: intimidate, embarrass, and isolate me. I laughed, shaking my head. If Karen wanted a show, she would get one, just not on her terms. That weekend, I organized a small harvest party, inviting friends and neighbors to celebrate the farm's growth. Lanterns swayed in the soft breeze, tables were piled with fresh produce, and music floated over the fields. The energy was magical. Children ran through the rows of vegetables, goats trotted happily behind them, and laughter filled the air. Karen, of course, arrived uninvited, strutting like she owned the place. But instead of causing a scene directly, she pulled out her phone, filming, muttering under her breath. Then came the chaos. Someone, or maybe it was Karen herself, released a few chickens outside the fenced area. They ran straight into the middle of the party, sending children squealing, dogs barking, and lanterns tipping over. Karen laughed, that cold, triumphant laugh, while I scrambled to round up the animals. Friends pitched in, and soon, the chickens were back behind the fence, the lanterns upright again, and the party continued, albeit with a new burst of energy and hilarity. The more she tried to sabotage, the more alive and unstoppable the farm felt. Karen's obsession seemed to grow by the hour. Social media became her weapon. She created fake accounts, posting videos of me breaking HOA rules, exaggerating minor missteps like leaving a wheelbarrow on the grass or planting flowers too close to the driveway. Some neighbors rolled their eyes, others whispered rumors, but the online attention gave the farm an unexpected boost. People were curious. They wanted to see the audacious outsider defying Karen's control. And slowly, what Karen intended as humiliation turned into viral publicity, a paradox that would fuel the drama for weeks to come. The most absurd incident happened one Thursday morning. I arrived to find a line of stakes and caution tape running diagonally across the property. Karen had somehow convinced herself that she could reclaim the land under some imaginary HOA clause. I stared at the ridiculous sight, bright yellow tape marking areas that were legally mine, stakes shoved haphazardly into the ground. I felt my pulse rise, but also a surge of defiance. The absurdity was so blatant it almost demanded confrontation. So I called a community meeting. Not with Karen, but with all the neighbors who had watched the saga unfold like a telenovela. I laid out the facts. Ownership documents, property boundaries, legal rights. Everyone listened, some shaking their heads at Karen's ridiculous obsession. By the end, laughter erupted, and the absurdity of her claims became a neighborhood joke. Karen's power, which once seemed terrifying, was crumbling under the weight of logic, community, and plain old stubbornness. But she didn't give up. Far from it. One night, I returned to the farmhouse to find tire tracks again, but this time leading straight to the vegetable garden. The basil, rosemary, and mint had been trampled, dirt flung everywhere, and the small scarecrow I had crafted lay face down in the mud. I stood there, taking in the scene, and for the first time, I felt a surge of anger I hadn't known before. This was beyond petty now, it was personal. I called my friends and neighbors. Together, we worked through the night, repairing, replanting, and fortifying the fences. We laughed, joked, and shared stories about Karen's latest antics. Somehow, amidst all the chaos, the farm became even more alive, more resilient, more communal. Every sabotage attempt strengthened bonds, sparked creativity, and brought joy. The farm wasn't just a property anymore, it was a movement, a symbol of defiance against absurd tyranny. The crescendo came during a rainstorm. I was inside the farmhouse, sipping tea, when I saw headlights on the driveway. Karen had arrived, umbrella in hand, soaked but determined, with her phone pointed at the house. She shouted something about violations and neighbors reporting activity, but the rain drowned out most of her words. I stepped outside, drenched but unafraid, and stared her down. The absurdity of the moment, soaked clothing, muddy boots, the wind whipping around, made the whole scene feel like a movie. "You're done, Karen," I yelled over the wind, voice echoing through the fields. "I'm not leaving. The farm is mine. The land is mine. And nothing you do can change that." Her glare could have frozen water, but I stood my ground. For hours, we faced each other, her fury raging, my determination solidifying. Eventually, she stormed off again, leaving me standing in the rain, muddy boots sinking slightly into the wet earth. And yet, instead of fear or exhaustion, I felt exhilaration. This was my fight, my dream, my land. Karen could rage, intimidate, and plot endlessly, but she could not break what I had built. Not the farm, not the community, not the spirit that had brought this place to life. By the end of the week, news of the chaos had spread far beyond the neighborhood. Social media buzzed with videos, memes, and stories of the outrageous HOA queen versus the defiant farm owner. People cheered, laughed, and admired the audacity. And for the first time, I realized something amazing. Karen, in all her obsession, had unwittingly turned the farm into a viral phenomenon. What was meant to intimidate me had instead amplified the dream, the farm, and the community around it. But I knew, deep down, that this wasn't the end. Karen's obsession had reached new heights, and the next move would be even more dramatic, more daring, and possibly even more ridiculous. The stakes were higher, the tension thicker, and the farm, my dream, had become a stage for one of the wildest neighborhood showdowns anyone had ever seen. The battle for my land had gone from letters and threats to chickens running amok, tire tracks, social media chaos, and rain-soaked showdowns. Each day was a test, each sabotage a challenge, and each victory a celebration. And through it all, one truth became undeniable. Karen could try to stop me, humiliate me, and obsess over me endlessly, but she could never stop the life, freedom, and community that had taken root on my farm. It all came to a head one blazing summer morning. I was checking the irrigation system, sweat trickling down my back, when I heard a commotion near the property line. At first, I thought it was another prank, another petty sabotage. But then I saw her, Karen, standing like a storm incarnate, surrounded by a swarm of people she had rallied, waving clipboards and shouting about rules, violations, and unlawful farming operations. Her face was red, veins bulging, and her eyes burned with pure obsession. This was it. The ultimate showdown. Karen had clearly escalated beyond all previous attempts. She had somehow convinced half the neighborhood to inspect the farm, claiming it posed a danger to property values. There were signs, tape, and even one ridiculously oversized banner declaring, "Stop the farm or face HOA consequences." I stopped for a moment, hands on hips, surveying the chaos. Part of me wanted to laugh at the sheer absurdity, but the other part of me felt adrenaline spike through my veins. This was war, and this time, everyone was watching. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my megaphone, a gift from my cousin for summer events, and climbed onto the edge of the barn roof. "Karen," I shouted, voice echoing across the fields. "This is my land. I followed every law, every regulation. You have no authority here." Her face twisted in disbelief, and she tried to shout over me, but the megaphone amplified my words far beyond her reach. "I will not be intimidated," I continued, pacing the roof like a general rallying troops. "This farm is a dream, a home, and a community. You can't take that away." The crowd was silent at first, stunned by the audacity of the moment. Then, slowly, neighbors began clapping, some cheering, others shaking their heads in amusement at Karen's meltdown. For the first time, her power felt fragile, ridiculous even, in the face of unity and courage. Karen didn't stop, of course. She advanced toward the barn, waving a thick stack of papers. "This is illegal. You're violating zoning laws. Everyone here will testify against you," she screeched. But as she approached, her followers began whispering among themselves, doubt flickering in their eyes. The longer they listened, the more it became clear. Karen had no legal ground, no actual authority outside her HOA, and no way to enforce her delusions. I stepped down from the barn roof, standing tall in the middle of my farm, hands on my hips, heart hammering. "Listen," I said, voice calm but firm. "I have proof. Every document, every permit, every law I followed. You're not in control here. I am. And so is everyone who believes in freedom and community." The tension cracked like a snapped rope. Some of her followers started quietly leaving, embarrassed. Others turned to me with nods of support. Karen, Realizing her grip was slipping, attempted one final theatrics. She threw a cup of mud in my direction. I ducked, letting it splatter harmlessly against a scarecrow I had placed for dramatic effect. Laughter erupted. Children laughed, adults chuckled, and even the local news crew covering the spectacle caught it all. Then came the moment that cemented her defeat. I unveiled the centerpiece of the farm, the harvest display. Vibrant vegetables, freshly picked fruits, and rows of herbs gleaming under the sun. Friends and neighbors gathered, tasting, admiring, and celebrating. The farm was alive with joy, laughter, and success, a living proof that Karen's threats and absurdities could not stand against dedication, heart, and community. Karen froze, realizing she had lost. The crowd was united, the farm thriving, and her power reduced to nothing more than empty fury. Slowly, she turned and stomped back to her SUV, muttering under her breath. I watched her drive away, the dust cloud behind her dissipating into the summer sky, leaving peace, freedom, and laughter behind. That evening, as the sun sank low, I walked through the fields, the scent of basil, rosemary, and mint filling the air. The farm was quiet now, save for the soft clucking of chickens and the gentle hum of life. I leaned against the fence, looking at the barn glowing in the soft golden light, and allowed myself to breathe. Karen's obsession had been intense, dramatic, and absurd, but it had only strengthened what I had built. Every seed I planted, every fence I repaired, every moment of defiance had grown into something beautiful and resilient. The neighbors started coming by regularly, not to spy or report, but to join. Picnics became a weekend tradition. Children learned to plant vegetables, adults shared recipes, and laughter echoed across the fields. What had begun as a battle against a tyrannical HOA queen had turned into a vibrant, thriving community. Weeks later, I received a letter. Not a threat this time, but a resignation. Karen had finally left the neighborhood, moving to another town where she could try to exert control again, leaving behind a trail of exasperated followers and a legend that the farm would always carry. And as the days passed, the story of the crazy HOA queen versus the fearless farmer spread online, becoming a viral sensation. People shared memes, videos, and even news coverage, celebrating the ultimate triumph of courage over control. I stood one last time on the porch of the farmhouse, looking out over my land. It wasn't just soil and plants anymore. It was hope, freedom, and victory. I had faced absurd threats, ridiculous sabotage, and relentless obsession, and I had emerged stronger, smarter, and more alive than ever. The farm had survived. The dream had survived. And so had I. Karen's departure left a lesson that would echo through the neighborhood for years. No amount of obsession, control, or ridiculous theatrics could destroy someone who believed in their dream, who fought for their land, and who welcomed community and joy over fear. The farm became a symbol, a viral, emotional, and wildly entertaining testament